So what are we seeing that's best practice at the moment?
Best practice, it's a bit new to everybody. I mean, I know we've been doing BNG for the past 5 years for councils, but as I say, it's only recently become mandatory. But best practice, there is guidelines out there from IEM, who are our governing body for ecology. There's 10 principles you should follow. Basically, the first one is you should avoid impacts in the first place. And as I said previously, use what you've got on site. There's also 2 other main considerations that clients need to be aware of. That is that they need to be avoiding impacts to irreplaceable habitats in the first instance. And they also need to meet something called the trading rules standard. So if you've got a certain habitat type or a certain distinctiveness, they need to be focusing that into their proposed design. Okay.
And one of the questions that's very common from a lot of our clients, because they're all very cost sensitive, how much do these sort of assessments cost?
It depends on your site, and that's the first thing the client should look at the early stages of the design. There's exceptions that apply, and they might be exempt from actually having to do the BNG in the first place. And if they get a professional to advise that, they could save all the cost in the first instance. Otherwise, as a minimum, it could be £500, it could be £1,000, it could be £1,500, depending on how complex the site is. And
the size of it as well, because you've got to walk over it. And
Exactly. And they might need the full bells and whistles, they might need a full assessment, accompanying report. They might also want something called a feasibility report, which gives them various options to consider. They also have to factor in the fact that they've got management plans to look at. It's a 30-year requirement to manage the land that they put into BNG, so they always have to have that in the back of their mind. That can be costly.
That's interesting, because a lot of people won't be thinking about that future management all the way for the next 30 years.
Exactly. It can be very costly if it's 30-year management. They should also think about if they're not going to achieve their credits on site, there is schemes in place now to compensate or pay in a compensation scheme. And they can factor that into their budget. It can be quite costly in the long run, but it is something worth considering. There is a government webpage out there that gives you credits available. There's also private schemes.
So that's where you're buying a credit in another habitat that's being created and going to be managed for a number of years?
Elsewhere. So they're paying that money into a pot through the council naturally.
Does it have to be in the same region then?
Ideally, yes, but if there's options for going wider, then it can be that. It can be a UK-wide.
So is it? I guess for some landowners, it almost becomes like a bit of a set-aside scheme?
It does, yeah, and a lot of farmers are realising that if they've got some derelict land that they can't farm for whatever reason, like floodplains, then they can get more money out of it by using Biodiversity Net Gain.
That's really interesting. So I always ask everybody this question: what career advice would you give to somebody who wants to be a budding ecologist?
If you want to be an ecologist, basically do what you like doing. If you're interested in being outdoors and wildlife, focus on that, because that's where your heart's going to be and that's where your skills will be, bringing that through. Whether that be an interest in bats, botany, reptiles, whatever it may be. Get out there, join your local groups, volunteer, get that experience, and that'll help you in your future career. But also don't forget about the transferable skills, like your IT skills, your report writing, graphic creation, liaising with clients. That's always key. So if you're wanting a career in any professional sector, make sure you've got those transferable skills.
And I think it's very true. We do a lot of work with schools, and we always tell people that English is very important, because your report is your shop window. So if you can get it across and you can write it well, then it becomes really important in our sort of world.
It definitely is, because at the end of the day, our technical reports are for clients, for planning applications. You need to be able to clearly communicate what you found on site and what that means for a client.
That's excellent. Well, thank you very much for listening to our podcast today about Biodiversity Net Gain. I think some of the key points that have come through for talking with Derek is making sure you use an appropriately qualified ecologist at the beginning, because that's quite key to setting out where the site is. It's also interesting that you can now buy credits in areas, which is something else which is quite new, and that will mean that you don't always have to compensate on site. And I think the final point that really rang across for me is use what you've got on the site. Don't start taking away the habitat before. Use what you've got and then maximise that through there. So thank you very much for listening today. Please follow Enzygo on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and tune in for the next podcast. Thank you.